We will now hear some welcome greetings from the President of the Computing Society of the Philippines, Dr. Rachel Edita Rojas.
Thank you, Joff. A pleasant good morning to everyone. On behalf of the Computing Society of the Philippines and its board of directors, I would like to welcome everyone to the event this morning. First of all, I'd like to thank our organizers, Dr. Henry, Dr. Jimmy, of course, Dr. Joffrey, and his team for putting the details into the proposed event. And of course, to our speakers and our pool of facilitators, thank you very much for joining us in this endeavor. Of course, to our participants, we are very happy that many have registered for this event. So, the Computing Society of the Philippines, as your professional organization in computing, would like to contribute to the capacity building of our colleagues in the higher education institutions, to our researchers in contributing to the existing body of knowledge. So we are happy to host this event, and we are looking forward to more of this kind of events wherein we look into the contribution of our colleagues to the existing body of knowledge. Thank you very much and a pleasant good morning. And we pray that we will have a fruitful endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rojas. I believe with that, we have gained more insight on what the thrust of CSP is and what the goal of this event is. But to further reinforce that, let's review some objectives of this event. So let's review the seminar workshop objectives. The project aims to provide an avenue for attendees to obtain assistance in the conduct of researches, and research proposals. Specifically, the project aims to assist those with working abstracts on or draft papers to come up with a finished paper ready for submission to a journal, and to assist those with working papers or draft project proposals to come up with a finished research project proposal ready for submission to a research funding agency. So we will now move on to an overview of the seminar workshop. This seminar workshop actually has two parts, and we're actually on one part. The event is divided into two parts. The seminars will be in the mornings, and we are there right now, and the workshops would be for the afternoons. So we are actually on day one, which is today, November 7. And the morning sessions or the seminars are actually there where the speakers or our resource people will be able to provide us with insights and guidelines on how to do research. So today we'll be having two talks. First one will be building publishable research papers in scientific and development avenues. And afterwards, there'll be a Q&A for that. And then we will move on to their second talk, which will be on best practices in research writing for publications, the sections of your research paper, and effectively conveying the parts of your research in them. Afterwards, there will be another Q&A. After then, there will be some announcements and then lunch break. For the afternoon, that will be for the workshop and selected participants, those who have submitted uh, initial parts of their research for further improvement, who have been chosen to participate in the workshop. The next day, which we will be the week after, on November 14, we'll be having a similar format, and it will be The third talk for the workshop, and actually the first talk for that day, would be conferences and journals, which ones to aim for and which ones to avoid. This one will be given by Dr. Merlin Suarez from the Del Salle University. Afterwards, there will be another set of Q&A for that. And then the next one would be on research proposals, how to prepare, and where to submit these research proposals. This one would be given by none other than Dr. Dave Marshall from Silliman University. And then afterwards, there will be another set of Q&A for that. And then further announcements for the afternoon activities, uh, lunch break, and then afternoon workshop. As was announced, the next session will be a couple of weeks after that. It's actually to give way for WCTP, so we might as well grab this opportunity to plug in that, do some plugging for that. There will be this workshop on computing theory and practice, which would cover up to November 21, which means we will be moving our event for November 28. But this will actually provide our authors, those who are developing their work, to have more time to work on their papers and developing them. And actually, um, we can actually digest more of the talks that have been given. For the last day, which is day 3, on November 28th, there will be one talk, which will be tips on line item budgeting, management, and progress reporting. So the one who would be giving that is one who has a lot of experience when it comes to projects, working on projects, and managing projects. It would be none other than Ma'am Mercedes Rodrigo from the Ateneo de Manila University. Afterwards, there will be a Q&A. And then after that, instead of having a second talk, there will be a panel discussion where all facilitators and available speakers will be present, and you can ask questions. If you have questions on research and related topics, specifically in computing, that would be a venue for asking those questions. Afterwards, from 11:30 to 12, we'll be having some feedback about the seminar, and of course, closing remarks for the seminar section. And after that, there will be a lunch break, of course. And then for the afternoons, it will be this time the opportunity for those who participated in the workshop to present the outputs. Okay, so there will be groups, and of course, feedback will be given because much about research is actually feedback and critiquing. So that would be an overview of our seminar workshop. At this point, we will now proceed to our first talk. Okay, we are running early, but I guess there's nothing wrong with that. Our first talk will be given by, it will be announced later, but I'd like to call on Dr. John Justine Villar to introduce our speaker.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I am a pleasure to introduce our first speaker. So our speaker received his PhD in computer science in 2015 from University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he's an associate professor currently. And from 2016 until the present, he is the head of the Algorithms and Complexity Research Laboratory. And he continues research collaborations with colleagues at University of Seville in Spain and Xiamen University in China, among others. The latter where he finished his postdoctoral work from 2016 to late 2019. So his research interests include the intersections of bio-inspired computing, computability, and parallel computing. Let's welcome Dr. Francis George Cabarle.
Uh, Thank you for the introduction. Justin, can you hear me? Is the audio fine? Sorry.
Yes, Francis.
Okay, thank you. I will just stop uh, broadcasting my video to save bandwidth and share my screen. Okay. Let me allow me to share my screen. Okay. Thank you again for the introduction and good morning. Thank you for inviting me to provide the talk for this workshop. This talk is actually uh, by Dr. Rochelle Wayo, but she's not able to present it, so I will present it on her behalf. So again, the title is Building Publishable Research Papers in Scientific and Development Avenues. So I think the idea here is you have some ideas or you've started some reading about some topic or project, uh, and you want to build again papers, research papers that eventually you will want to publish, as mentioned by Dr. Geoffrey Solano and other colleagues this morning. The rest of the 3 day talks of this workshop are about research, building research papers, proposals, etc. So I think this talk is a nice introduction and overview of the two types of research. So the scientific or the more theoretical one that is covered by this part over here. I hope you can see my cursor, and also the development avenues, the more applicative ones, because I think some of you are in the computing or mathematical background or IT and engineering background. So this one, this talk will hopefully cover those areas among other things. Okay, so okay, sorry. So of course, to start, it's always a good idea to check the fundamentals, what we mean by research. In this case, Dr. Wayong referred to the Oxford Dictionary of English. So research, according to them, is the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish new facts and reach new conclusions. So the important keywords here, of course, systematic investigation, and you want to establish facts and reach new conclusions. So without these especially important keywords, at least according to the Oxford Dictionary of English, and I have to agree with the Oxford Dictionary of English, then what you're doing is not research. If you are not investigating in a systematic way, and of course, if you're not establishing facts as well as reaching new conclusions, so that would not be, at least from our perspective, including Oxford's perspective, that would not be research. And if you look at the next definition from the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they're very similar keywords. They define research as any creative systematic activity undertaken in order to increase the stock of knowledge, including knowledge of man, culture, and society, and use of this knowledge to devise new applications. Okay, so as you can see, this one is a more verbose definition, but the ideas about research are essentially the same. So systematic a set of activities to create new knowledge, okay, reach new conclusions. So without those specific keywords, we are not doing research. So we have to be, you have to check those things in order to claim that what we're doing, what activities, and eventually the paper that we will be publishing. Some of you may be able to do that with this workshop. We may confidently call it a research work or research paper, research activity. So now that we've established that, uh, so again, the another reminder, main takeaway here is a systematic way of solving a problem. Okay, so it has to be systematic, and we will highlight or elaborate a bit more in the succeeding slides. So again, one main goal of doing research. Okay, I think perhaps most of us will be from an academic or academic background. others are maybe outside the academe, but essentially when you want to do a research, uh, including writing a research paper or a proposal, whichever applies to your case, you want to convey an idea. Okay, so you start with the problem, and you have to tell or at least convince the reader. And for those who will be writing proposal, you have to convince your funding agency that it's an interesting problem and that it's not easy to solve the problem. Okay? It's not trivially solvable. It requires more than some weeks or a month or so, and it requires considerable efforts, intellectual efforts, among other things, okay, creative efforts. So, and then you will want to tell the readers or the funding agency that here are how other people, other institutions, other groups approached or solved the problem. Okay, because you want to start, and I will emphasize this again in the next talk. But the main idea here is there to tell a narrative that there is something to be solved, and uh, a version of it has been solved by other people. Okay, and now you will tell your idea or ideas, uh, and also in your research paper proposal, it's always a good idea to do readings on related works. So you want to tell them that this is how my idea compares to other people's approaches. Okay, and then of course you will outline. If it is a finished paper, then of course you have to have the methodology analysis results. But if it's a proposal, uh, you might want to have at this point a conceptual framework, methodology, timeline, Gantt chart. You want to convince the reader or the funding agency that this is how your idea works. Okay, so then you will need to provide the details, the data, and so on. Okay, so this is the general flow and idea of why you want to do a research, and how to do the research, including the publishable form. We will talk about this morning in this talk and the next. Okay, so again, to emphasize, research is a systematic way of solving a problem. These are some of the uh, generally recognized steps or sections. Okay, you want to identify a research problem. You do some literature review. This is about so you can tell your readers or the funding agency what others have done in this area of your research problem. You want to, of course, specify a purpose of your research, uh, the applications or the people or groups of people or areas impacted by your research. You want to determine the specific research questions. Uh, the next few parts, specifying a conceptual framework and designing the methodology, are about, of course, telling the readers or the funding agencies why you think your idea or ideas work to solve the problem we began with at the top of this list. Of course, you design the methodology. This one specifically should be specifically the systematic steps on how to solve your problem, including their relation or organization in time, in weeks and months, and so on, uh, or at least their logical connectivity in relation to other steps. And the next few ones, analyzing and evaluating the results, of course, are there to help you convince again the readers or the funding agency that uh, your methodology and framework and ideas did solve uh, your research problem. Okay, and then finally, you want to conclude your research proposal or paper and identify avenues for future work, because you generally it's not a good idea to end with all positives only. You have to be able to know some of the limitations of your work, and clearly that is the limitations are some of the avenues for future work, either by yourself in the next project or in the next paper, or other researchers in the future. Okay, so uh, Now let's briefly walk through the types of research. I think this is the point of Dr. Wayong here. So, and then we'll give some examples. So some of you uh, may relate to some of these ideas or types of research. So uh, uh, two main ways you can classify research are the basic and the applied. Okay, so what we mean by basic research is they're aimed at expanding existing scientific knowledge. Specifically, you'll see here that the nature of basic research is mainly theoretical, whereas the applied research is are the research is designed to solve specific or practical problems, okay, or answer certain questions specifically about showing that a theory or some ideas or concepts are applicable in the natural world, for example, the tangible world. So the nature of applied research, as you can see, is practical. The name implies applied. Applied or practical applications are the significant portion of this. Of course, you can have research that are research papers or research proposals that combine both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So, but of course, there are research that are completely basic or theoretical, and others are completely practical. So, no problem with that. The utility or the usefulness of basic research, of course, is usually universal, meaning it can apply now or in the future. Longer lifespan, that is, applied research, of course, is can be usually rather limited by the technology used, of course. Uh, it may be useful in a few years or in a few decades, whereas basic research can be the utility or usefulness can be much longer. And the basic research is concerned with developing, again, scientific knowledge and predictions, which can be tested by applied research. Whereas applied research develops technologies and techniques that can then later be used to, again, to develop scientific knowledge and predictions. So at this point, you can see there is a feedback mechanism. The basic research makes increases our knowledge and makes predictions. Applied research creates the tools so that we can test the knowledge and predictions produced by basic research. Okay, and again, the goal of basic research is to add some knowledge to existing ones, or to create new avenues for or areas for research, while as applied research is to find the solutions for problems at hand, especially again, some of them to test the ideas or predictions of applied basic research. Sorry. So again, in a more visual way, basic research answers the question of fundamental questions such as how do things work. Okay, and answering that question of basic research leads to new products, technologies, and processes. Whereas the new products, technologies, and processes created by answering a fundamental or basic questions are used by applied research. Okay, and then using these, the applied researches create, again, as I mentioned earlier, new fundamental questions uh, that are going to be answered again by people doing basic research. So again, this is just to reinforce the feedback mechanism. So one is not necessarily better or more useful than the other, of course. And as a famous computer scientist, Donald Knuth, says, uh, best theory is inspired by practice. Okay, so this would be the theory, and this the blue rectangle would be the practice, and the best practice inspired by theory. So they help each other to produce new technologies and knowledge. Okay, so with those two in mind, um, just a quick example of basic research. Again, we recall that basic research is research that studies, for example, in this example research that studies problems on strings. In this example, Dr. Wayong listed creating algorithms or solutions for these two string-based problem, the shortest common supersequence problem, as well as shortest common superstring problem. So the problems are about basic properties of strings and operations related to them. Okay. Another, what is an example of an applied research would be researching research that studies genome of a species. For example, you're given uh, genome sequences either in wet lab, or it could be as digital data. So your goal is to uh, sequence these, for example, is to recreate some other patterns useful for biologists, for example. Okay, so uh, a more detailed categorization of research includes these few things we will talk about briefly here, and then give examples in the next few slides. So one type of research, exploratory research. The goal of an exploratory research is to do research so that you can actually identify question or problems which you will use as basis for your future research, or for research of other people if you publish your research paper, okay, or your funding. So the goal of this is, again, is a research to create more research, specifically to identify what you want to research on, or questions, uh, problems that you want to solve later on. Okay, uh, hence the term exploratory research. We will give some examples in a moment. The next one is constructive research. And the purpose of this type of research is to test theories and propose solutions to a problem or question. Okay? And of course, as the name implies, it requires construction of certain structures, okay? Could be tangible or intangible, to test theories, okay? Mathematics, computer science, biology, physics, chemistry, and so on. Uh, Another type of research is empirical research. The purpose of empirical research is to test the feasibility of a solution, not necessarily bound by a certain theory or a well-known general concept. Okay, but you want to test the feasibility of a solution, or at least some ideas, without the guidance of a universal or general theory. You will test them using empirical evidence, that is collecting samples or data, and doing measurements, or as you can see below, quantitative or qualitative tests or analysis. So quantitative, of course, it means you are able to quantify data and measurements from whatever collection of data you've collected, or samples you've collected, for more tangible experiments, or digital data, for example, for more intangible experiments, while qualitative is based on observations and descriptions of specific situations. Okay. Of course, one common way to do qualitative is to use some survey or polls, but of course, that depending on the questions, they cannot that such kinds of measurements or way of obtaining information can also be quantitative, depending on your survey or poll questions. And of course, as usual, you can have some hybrid or mixture of this, qualitative and quantitative. That is quite common practice, to have quantitative and qualitative analysis or measurements in your research. And quantitative and qualitative measurements, of course, can also apply to constructive and exploratory research. So let's see some examples of the previous categorizations of research. So for constructive research, one example of that is solving the university class scheduling problem using advanced ILP techniques. So, of course, uh, the problem here, of course, is the class scheduling problem. Uh, perhaps for a specific university, perhaps hypothetical or otherwise, and then they will solve the problem by building algorithms or software using ILP techniques. Okay, and at the bottom, another paper about class scheduling from the Central Luzon State University. Again, they will, I think the authors here also build an algorithm or software system to solve the class scheduling problem in this specific university. Okay, so the type of research that involves constructing things. Of course, these two are just examples from the computing science, but constructive research, of course, applies to other areas of research, physical or non-physical sciences. Okay. The next one is exploratory research. As I mentioned previously, exploratory research could be about is the research about exploring tangible. Again, tangible could be at least for example, for biologists, exploring parts of a forest or sea, and can also exploratory research could also be about exploring intangible areas. In this case, the semantic web, the World Wide Web. Okay, so in this example of an exploratory research, characterizing knowledge on the semantic web with Watson. Uh, in the short, at least in the portion of their abstract here, in the World Wide Web, they will collect and analyze access to ontologies and semantic data, how information is labeled and stored, and semantic data, of course, is about the meaning in these networks in the World Wide Web. So they will be collecting stuff so that later on they can do measurements, the size or weights of links, statistics, patterns, and so on to be able to generate more questions or research. And another example at the bottom here, collected by Dr. Wayang, is Twitter data. What do they represent? Okay, so this research is about collecting Twitter data and checking, again, patterns, measuring connectivity between users in Twitter, which is a popular social media platform, etc. Okay, and then again later they will after collecting huge amounts of data, the researchers aim to ask other questions or to create other types of researches from this exploratory data by exploring Twitter data here and the semantic web up here. Okay, so and lastly, empirical research, of course, is about uh, not necessarily doing research, as I mentioned, guided by some universal concepts, but it could be at least in terms of verifying the concepts. So for example, in this paper here, students' emotional reactions to programming projects in Introduction to Programming, they will measure approach and influence on learning outcomes. So this is about how education in programming languages. And the one at the bottom is, again, as the title implies, qualitative research in computer science education. So most of these researches involve setting up experiments to answer their questions rather than the more theoretical or logical approaches. Okay, so and then doing tests and evaluations on the collected data as well. So let me proceed to the next one. The next this might be the last or second to the last section by Dr. Wan. This is about analyzing and evaluating methods or results, okay, of your research paper or proposal. So for the more theoretical types of research, usually they will involve math proofs. In this case, the paper proposes an improvement, proposes an algorithm where the algorithm maybe an improvement, or if they're defining a new problem, then of course the algorithm might be novel, but based on similar algorithms previously published. So the most common analysis types of analysis when proposing an algorithm, okay, regardless if it is an algorithm for improving a previous algorithm or for a new problem that the authors are proposing. The two most common types of analysis of an algorithm when proposing an algorithm, uh, meaning the standard way of analyzing and investigating algorithms, is to prove that the algorithm works, it is correct. That is, it does solve the problem for the specified range or instances uh, of values. And lastly, you want to show that the algorithm is efficient. Okay. Of course, it's quite easy. It is usually quite easy to provide an algorithm that runs very slow, meaning uh, at least for the more theoretical, with more theoretical background, the exponential or higher running time, okay, with respect to the input size. But what is, of course, better is to provide an algorithm that is efficient, meaning less than exponential, okay, polynomial, and so on, which of course is not so easy to do for many problems. So an example of a math proof is from this paper by some of our colleagues: strong span patterns generation using subsequence cover problem, SCP. They will subsequence cover problem, sorry. Reduction in the term product operation. Uh, this was published in the Philippine Journal of Science, a journal, an international journal by the Department of Science and Technology. So uh, this is a portion of their paper. They list the algorithm for SSP. I think this stands for strong span patterns construction. So they specify the inputs, for example, here, some set L and some natural number N, and they list the specific, the precise steps of their algorithm over here with some, we omit some of the details here until the last section, which is to proceed to the next pattern and then repeat the entire thing again while there is some pattern to process. Okay, and a common result of theoretical researches using mathematical proofs, of course, are results such as theorems. Okay, which are general useful claims about some mathematical constructs or ideas. Okay, so for example, in this paper by our colleagues, the theorem 2, the SSP TC algorithm, solves the subsequence cover problem. So this part covers what I mentioned earlier about proving that the algorithm works. So their theorem 2 uh, covers is the claim that this algorithm in over here, section 3.2.1, is correct. And then the next theorem, theorem 3, the SSPTC algorithm solves the subsequence cover problem, sub CP here, in order MN, in big O MN, where M is the number of patterns, input patterns, and N is the dimensions of the data set. So this one tells us, covers the second part where the authors prove that the algorithm is efficient because it runs in time M, in order Mn, M multiplied to N. In order M, the number of input patterns multiplied to the dimension of the data set. So this is one example of an efficient algorithm. Okay. Now, the other main way to assess research, the researches I've mentioned earlier about exploratory research, uh, empirical, and so on. Again, the further subdivisions of basic and applied research, as some of you may recall a few slides ago. Another way to assess your work is practical assessment. Okay, in some researches, aside from or in together with mathematical proofs. Again, they could be mixed, basic and applied, practical assessment of resources. Again, of course, resources could be computer memory, computer time, the number of computers, etc. Okay, uh, are considered through stress testing, benchmarking, and other similar terms. Okay, for example, one way to do this is you plot or you graph the time or space resource as the size of the input increases. Okay. An example of this is by some of our colleagues here, uh, QSNP, Spiking Neural P Systems Simulators in CUDA. These are some massively parallel processor, GPU, graphics processing units. So what they did in these snapshots, for example, I think you may not be able to see it, but the vertical axis in this figure 3 is the running time in seconds, I think, or milliseconds. And the horizontal axis is the size of the input. And then in this figure, of course, they are comparing three types of things. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there is a gray line, an orange line, and a blue line, and clearly plotting input size against time over here. The gray part is worst off, meaning it is as input size increases, it is the slowest in terms of running time for this type of research. Okay, so they're trying to assess this the simulator they implemented by testing it across time and input size. Okay, and the same thing is done here. The horizontal axis is again the size of the input, and the vertical axis, sorry, is the time in seconds, I think. So uh, another way to assess your research, of course, especially in relation to the previous slide, especially if you're not able to procure the required uh, more physical or tangible resources. For example, you're not able to build some building or engine or machine or computer, you can resort to simulation. Okay, now which is becoming, of course, more common nowadays with software and hardware becoming cheaper uh, every year. So uh, one way to show how good your proposed scheme is to mimic or to emulate a real scenario through simulation. Okay. So for example, in this research uh, used as an example by Dr. Wayong, time-dependent adaptive pricing for mobile internet access. So the goal here of the authors is to simulate uh, at least a portion or an idealized version of mobile internet pricing for mobile internet access for data streaming. I'm not sure which year is this, but most likely 3G or 4G if more recent. And what they did was we can see here that some of their parameters to simulate at least some part of the real world is the variable P, which is the congestion probability. So they add some form of probability to simulate congestion in real world. Another variable they used was R, which is the monthly revenue for the internet service provider, and the variable U is the cost to a user for sending 1 byte of information. Okay, and then of course they again did some stress testing or benchmarking with these nice graphs over here. Depending on the values they deemed realistic or reasonable for congestion, for monthly revenue of internet provider, uh, the cost of sending 1 byte of information, and so on. Okay, so this is an example of a simulation research. Lastly, or one of the last few things about your research paper or proposal is expert validation. In this case, what this means is that for some of us who are computer scientists, mathematicians, physicists, and so on, IT experts. Some of our research paper or uh, um, proposals will involve certain domains we are not experts in. Okay, it could be a biological domain, a chemical domain, economic domain, and so on. So, what expert validation means is to actually uh, make your research paper or fund a research proposal uh, reasonable, and feasible. Of course, you want to consult domain experts, which will interpret your the results of your algorithm or software or system, or even at the very least a design, based on their domain knowledge. Okay, could be, as I mentioned, uh, biological, or for weather, for example, meteorologists, scientists with meteorology background will be able to help you with that. So that is what we mean by domain experts, and asking expert validation from domain experts. Okay, so for example, in this research mentioned by Dr. Wayong, data signature for traffic data analysis. Um, these are some of our colleagues here, and if I'm not mistaken, all of them are mathematicians, computer scientists, and but the part of their research is again working on traffic data. Okay, and of course, as far as I know, none of them are traffic engineers or are focusing on traffic research. So what they did was to have these experts from the NCTS, or National Center for Transportation Studies, if I'm not mistaken, and they asked them about certain phenomenon or phenomena, at least two of them here, that they found that their system or software produced, to validate if there are indeed some physical or at least uh, traffic theories or ideas that would explain such kind of results they obtained from their research. Okay, so another example used by Dr. Wayang is non-metric multidimensional their non-metric multidimensional work or algorithm for characterizing yeast cell cycle. Okay, by some of our colleagues here, and again, they are computer scientists and working on in computer science or IT fields. But of course, part of their research involves yeast cell cycle. So uh, the data or the results generated by their work were they ask experts from biology experts to check or at least to help them make sense of their output, as in the similar slides, okay, about traffic data, and inquiring with the traffic engineers about their results. Another one is, of course, conducting tests. This one is about acceptability test of remote as controller of an educational game. Again, while these colleagues are instructors or teachers, the main background is computer science or computing related. So they have to also consult with education experts to better make sense of the development or the results of their developed educational game. Okay, so uh, the next one, before we're almost done with this talk, the reminders on research ethics. I will reiterate these again in the next talk, but it makes good a segue here to mention them. Of course, these are some of the serious ways to do or to conduct research: fabrication of data, okay, and falsification of data. You only select some of the data that you obtain, but discarding others that may uh, uh, that may disprove some of your claims or your ideas. Okay, some of the results of doing these kinds of misconducts here: fabrication, falsification. Some of the others include plagiarism, adding guest authors or ghost authors, uh, whereas the authors did not contribute at all, or just to increase the assumed veracity of your work, for example, and submitting duplicate publications. For example, submitting the same paper to two different conferences or journal papers, journal magazines or publications, and of course, some others are abusing the peer review process, where in this case, when for example, in some journal publications, you are required to suggest reviewers, and of course, uh, you may be able to suggest reviewers that are your own colleagues or may not even be uh, uh, professionals or experts in your area, as long as you get a good review, of course. So that is one of the some of the ways to review the to abuse the peer review process, which is why nowadays there are some measures to combat this. But for other journal publications, this may still be applicable. Okay, so FFP here means fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, which are three of the uh, worst things that can be done in producing research papers and proposals. Okay, so some of the things to avoid. Now, the output of a research, going to moving towards the end, the output of your research, of course, is a manuscript, at least for for our students, for the students in the audience. Uh, it may earn you a degree. Um, for especially the graduate students or the instructors, faculty members, and so on, they can be the results of your research, uh, as a paper or as one of the deliverables of your research proposal is a paper submitted to conference or journal. Okay, so a journal is a newspaper magazine. Normally, at least in the scientific field, what we mean by that is a technical magazine that deals with a particular subject or professional activity. And a conference is, again, a meeting of people. Could be the conference could be a general conference for a large area. For example, computing science and IT related field. So theory and applied people can meet there, as well as there are conferences for very specific fields. Okay, for example, for computer theory only, or for machine learning or neural networks only conferences. And of course, there are other avenues for sending the output of your research, such as books, technical reports, presenting the abstract or posters, for example, of your work. Okay, so here I think Dr. Wayong collected some of the covers of the uh, journals that many of our colleagues are submitting to. IEEE Transactions on Nanobioscience, for example, the Philippine Computing Journal by CSP, the Philippine Journal of Science, and others. Okay, so let me move on. So, um, of course, a natural question at this point is, why would you submit your research work to a conference or journal? Um, one of course one answer to that is to present your work in a large audience, and to get feedback from other experts. So for example, this one is Jim Paul Karandang, one of our colleagues, presenting a part of his master's work in Malaysia in 2016, amongst experts or professionals in the same research area. Okay, so another answer to this question up here is, of course, to meet and possibly collaborate with other universities. This one is the one the 2017 version of the conference or the workshop mentioned by Dr. Geoffrey earlier this morning, workshop on computation theory and practice, was held in Osaka in Japan. Uh, and of course, other conferences that Dr. Wayang collected here. For example, the Alan Turing Centenary in the UK, CMC in Moldova, I think, CMC in Budapest, Hungary, and this one is in China or Malaysia, I think, Asian CMC in 2016. I think part of what Dr. Wayang is pointing out is could also be travel and tourism, another answer to the question, okay? And I think I'm almost done here. The main parts of a paper submission, usual formula, and some of these I will reiterate in the next talk, uh, are these things listed here, okay? And the submitted paper is usually shorter than a thesis or a dissertation, okay? Much shorter actually, 8 to 12 pages, usually in single column, or a bit shorter for double column or 2-column formats, okay? So I think this is the end of the slides for Dr. Wayong, and thank you very much for listening. I will be happy to take some questions and give to Dr. Geoffrey or Dr. Justin the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that talk, Dr. Cabarle. It was very enlightening. It covers a lot of topics. And we will now be opening the floor for questions to any of our participants today, our attendees. You can post your questions on the Q&A part. There's a button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We suggest that you open it, you post the questions there. It would be better. You can also raise your hand if you want to have an audio question. If you want to include it in chat, there will be some disadvantage because it's hard to trace if it's already been answered. So it's better to have it in Q&A. But there is one who is already raising her hand. I think Ma'am Josie Calvaforo, would you like to ask a question to our speaker? Okay. I'm not sure if she has a question actually. If you have questions, let's see if there's anyone who plays something on the chat. Okay. Well, it has, or there's a question here to the panelists. It's actually about the webinar as a whole, no? I think the question is there an evaluation after the webinar? Yes, there is. Okay, and we will be sending the link for that later on. And are you going to provide certificate for this webinar? Thanks a lot. So it has been announced that certificates will not be given, except if you are already a member. Certificates will only be given to members of CSP. And should you want details on that, we have already sent that to you in the announcement on becoming a member of CSP, because only members of CSP will be given certificate for this online seminar. Other questions, if there are any? Oh, there are already some items in Q&A. Okay. Sige, this is the question. Are formal domain experts in computing field that was already defined for the purpose of evaluating? Are there formal or just the inclusion or exclusion criteria?
Okay. I think I can try to answer this on behalf of Dr. Wang, but if others are other panel members can answer, please do. And my answer to this question is, for the purpose of evaluating, it could be the other way around. In this case, I am not sure of the precise uh, uh, distribution of the attendees here, but I suspect most of us are in the mathematical computing field. So of course, if there are researches mainly done by other fields, for example, biology, biologists, physicists, and so on, then uh, uh, they would be producing. They may be able to produce results that can be validated by computing or mathematical sciences experts. So in that case, we would be the domain experts to the works to parts of the works of, for example, biologists, physicists, economists, and so on. So I'm not sure if I got that question correctly, but I think Dr. Justin wants to answer it uh, because it says here Dr. Justin Villar wants to answer it. So maybe you have something to add, Justin. Is he still here? Okay. Okay.
I think we may opt to answer that by
Like that.
typing on text, perhaps.
Okay.
So I can just move to
Mhm.
the next question, and I will ask Justin later if he has a text answer to that. So this is the next question: can both basic and applied research be used? If yes, what do you call that one? Thank you.
Uh, it says here that John Justin would like to answer this live again. Uh, I'm not sure how that is done here. Maybe after the next one, Dr. Justin can answer. But I think the question by Crescent de Guzman and Jennifer Contreras are very similar
Yes,
because
yes,
the next
yes.
one is about possibility of combining two research techniques in one research. And yes, the answer is yes. Um, the and in relation to the second question, then what is it called? Sorry, the first question is what is it called? Can call it in various names, but at least for this presentation by Dr. Wanyong, the label for that is a mixed type of research, as mentioned in the previous slide. And as an example, maybe some of our colleagues can tell me otherwise, but if I'm not mistaken, this work I hope you can still see the screen, the slide that I'm sharing. Their work by data signatures for traffic data analysis. I think it combines some theoretical and some experimental work. Okay, so you can combine those into a mixed type of research info. Okay, it doesn't have to be a basic or theoretical or purely experimental or applied research. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So the next question is from Gerald Albano. Is in action research, what are the requirements needed? What statistical method needs to be used? It can be qualitative or quantitative. Is that I think that's a question.
Maybe Dr. Justin can answer this. There is another prompt that says John Justin Villar would like to answer this question live. So
Hi, Francis. I'm just
okay,
tagging so that we know
okay.
who
I
has
will I
the
will
answer.
answer
Yeah.
with the microphone. Okay. Yeah, I've not done much statistical, at least research involving statistical methods. But yes, it is correct. You can do qualitative or quantitative. Of course, qualitative could be in form of polls or surveys with some ranges or scale. Quantitative, of course, could be again measurements on your data. Okay, and making sense if your claims or at least the one you're trying to check are statistically relevant, for example, or useful. So I'm not sure what you mean by action research, but I hope that answers uh, most of your question. Okay, about statistical methods to be used. Uh, course, common way to do that is spreadsheets, but of course you can program your own implementation of statistical concepts or ideas. Okay, I think the one by Jennifer Contreras has been answered also well. And
Okay,
there's
another one. Is computer science research more on study about algorithms rather than developing technology?
okay. This one is my favorite question so far. Uh, and the answer is it's neither, because at least for some of us, the we think computer science is combination of several things. Um, it's a combination of it can be considered partly natural science because it concerns about tangible natural things that you can test or refute. It could also be logic mathematics because it involves uh, concepts such as non-determinism, precise definition of algorithms and solutions. It could also be philosophical, of course. Can be talking computer science can be talking about again in relation to determinism, which one is harder to solve. It's harder to solve a problem than to give a solution to the problem in other philosophical questions. So it doesn't have to be defined by either. Can be algorithms purely, at least your research or your work, or as I mentioned, it could be applied or empirical. In that case, you want to develop technology, software applications, or both. So the nice thing about it is uh, the field of computing science, as initiated by Alan Turing decades ago, it covers these things: algorithms, theory, and applications. So you are most welcome to do either or both. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, mhm. Okay. There's another question here. It's very more on the domain of statistical, no? Uh, in action research, what test of measurement needs to be used? Measurement of central tendency or hypothesis testing?
Mm, okay. Maybe I'll defer this to somebody else. Maybe Sir Geoff or Sir Justin,
Yeah.
because mhm, as I said, for my part, I've not done much research on statistical involving statistical method, but can maybe Sir Geoff or Sir Justin can.
Francis, I think I can answer this one.
Okay, please. Thank you. Mhm.
So I'm Justin Villar and I'm on scientific computing basically. So to answer your question, actually it depends to start when you determine the statistical test in analyzing your problem. First, you need to define what do you want to uh, to come up basically, no? So kung ano yung problem na gusto mong isolve. Then afterwards, you determine all the variables. So yung basically parang to put in ComSci parlance, ano yung mga input and output mo. So ito yung magiging variables mo, independent and dependent. Then later on, saka mo malalaman kung ano yung appropriate statistical test na kailangan mong gamitin. Or on your terms, test of measurement. Thank you.
Okay, actually, I think that has been, that is, thank you very much, Sir Just Dr. Villar, for that. And there's a comment here that actually seconds that, no? If I may add, statistical test depends on the research question. And I think Dr. Villar also mentioned that. It's from Jean Tabi, one of our participants in the workshop later. It depends
Je-
on the research question of the actual research.
Jeff, may I comment on the one of the previous questions?
Okay, ma'am, please. Ma'am Annette, is this Ma'am
Ye-
Annette?
Yes, I just want to comment on the question. Computer science is the research mostly algorithms or on the development of the technology? Uh, a lot of the research will start with presentation of an algorithm. And then another research paper may go on to actually develop the technology and then present that technology. So in many cases, that has been the progression. You start by doing publishing a piece of your research, which is about the algorithm that you're proposing, and then continue to work on that research, develop the technology, and then you can have subsequent papers that actually show the product that you've developed based on the algorithm that you previously presented. So just a short comment.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Annette Lagman. Are there other questions? We are quite early in our schedule, so
I
we
think
can ask
there is
them more
one more.
questions.
Sir Joff, I think that there's
A
another
question.
related question from Gerald again, but I think I can also answer this one.
Okay,
Okay,
please.
I'll read the
Okay.
question.
Sige, go.
What is the best data presentation in a specific research? Dr. Villar, please.
Again, this is related to what is your research question, no? And what are your variables. But of course, first it depends on how many variables you want to visualize. So for example, may mga examples si Francis kanina 2 by 2, but actually you can present multidimensional uh, graphs or tables. So again, it depends on your research problem and what are your available data that you want to visualize. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Villar. Are there other questions? I strongly suggest that you write even in the chat because there may be a mistake of raising your hand and you cannot unraise it anymore. I tried to answer one before. So here's another question from Albin Katipay. Hello, Professor. Do you have any suggestion for someone who is having a problem with finding a problem to solve or a research topic? Oh,
Okay, I can try to give an answer, but of course, some of our colleagues might also chime in and send their answers. For this type of problem, I think the exploratory type of research, as mentioned by uh, Dr. Wang in her slides, is the more appropriate type. Okay, so in that case, this I'm not sure if you can still see the slides uh, I'm showing over here. Uh, so the exploratory type of research. So that is, I'm not sure if you can still see the slides. For example, as I mentioned, if you have at least some idea of the area that you want to work on, but as you mentioned in your question, your problem is to find a specific problem or research topic. Okay, so of course, first thing that you want to do is at least have an idea of the general area. Right? So, for example, in the slides that I'm showing, that I hope you can see, their area of interest is the World Wide Web. Okay, and at the bottom, their area of interest is a specific area of the World Wide Web, that is Twitter data. So what they do in this exploratory research is to, again, still systematically collect and check the inputs or the data from the World Wide Web or for Twitter, take measurements, collect data, take measurements. In the case of Twitter, for example, the nodes can be Twitter users, and their links could be if they're connected as friends or as contacts, and so on. So by collecting data, measuring certain properties, and performing some experiments on your data, then you can have a more specific question or topic in mind. And of course, another way to find specific problems is, of course, to read papers And if they're well written, especially towards the end of the paper, they will list problems that have yet to be solved. So of course, some of those you can use as your own research topic or research problem, especially if it has not been solved or it has not been solved satisfactorily yung question na yun. Okay, so yeah, that is my answer. I'm not sure if our colleagues here have other things to add. And then there are a few more questions, I think. For example, if you will allow me, Sir Jeff, si Dea Abalo,
Yes, please. Thank you,
how
sir.
do you classify the study on classifying data using naive Bayes algorithm? Maybe Sir Justin or Sir Geoff, uh, you have more experience with this type of work?
Well, actually, I believe this covers studies on machine learning,
Mhm.
um, different machine learning techniques from artificial neural networks, naive Bayes,
Mhm.
going to support vector machines. There are studies on that, even going to deep learning. Yes, these are also uh, making models now that will be able to predict a particular outcome, no? And that's still part of developing a model for a particular problem or predicting a particular feature given other features. Yes, there's a whole body of research on that too. It can be done. Okay. Um, it's im- okay. It is important to secure a source of sufficient data set first before drafting a proposal or draft the topic and find data sets, which is a more efficient technique, especially if time is of the essence. I would like to open the floor to any one of the panelists who would want to answer that. No, especially those who are involved in machine learning. Any one of the panelists who have much experience on data sets. So is it important to secure a source of sufficient data set first before drafting a proposal or draft the topic and then find data sets? I'd like to give the floor first to anyone, no, who would want to answer that.
As Doc Job. I think on my part, no, because I'm also on the mostly on applied research. I think on personally, so of course, my opinion is not necessarily apply to others. So on my part, usually I check if at least the data is somehow available or easily can be gathered. So yun yung guideline ko when if time is of the essence because you can at least simultaneously gather data and propose. So first at least you need to check firstly at least the literature if you can get some data to solve your problem.
Yeah, I, I think it's essential to get a good data set, no? Because if in the end, if you don't have that data, you cannot be working on anything. Um, here's another question: can you give an idea on how to easily determine the gap based from the RRL gathered? Okay, so I'd like to give the floor to any one of the panelists. I would really want to provide Sir Francis some break, even at this point, because, well, he will be giving out to talk. So I really would want to give him a break. So if there are answers from any one of the panelists, please, you can answer that. So can you give an idea on how to easily determine based from the gap, based from the RRL gathered?
Uh, okay. Can you give ideas how to easily determine the gap? Okay. Hello. Can you hear me, po, Sir Job?
Yes, Sir
Yes.
Francis.
Okay. I'll give a few answers at least from my background or experience. to easily determine the gap based on our RRL gathered. I'll be talking a few more stuff about this in the next lecture, but one way to easily determine the research gap based from the papers you read related work is, of course, to read the abstract to know what the paper is about, and then read the final section, usually where the authors read list down future work, next steps to do, or stuff they have not done or solved it, open problems. Okay, so that is especially if you're in a hurry or you want to go through quite a number of papers. That is one quick way, of course. And then, of course, the next step that you need to do after that is, of course, to check the citations of that paper, because if the paper lists that problem A and B are gaps or open problems to be solved, the next paper or the next paper by other researchers in the next months or years may have solved the problems A and B that are listed as gaps or problems. So, of course, you have to again check other papers, especially the papers that are citing the paper that you read. But that would be, I think, one easy and quick way, more or less, to do the to identify research gaps or open problems that you may want to solve on your own for your paper or proposal. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much for that, Sir Francis. If there are other questions that may not necessarily be directed to Sir Francis, any one of us in the panelist, among the panelists, can perhaps help answer and perhaps give some break for Sir Francis at this point. Any other questions? So I'm happy to share that there are 111 participants at this point. So it's good to share that. Um, any other questions from anyone in the group? There's a raised hand, Ma'am Josie. If you can just write it, or we can try to answer it. No, there's another insight here from Sir Jean. No, from Sir Jean Tabi. He says that, if I may add, I think this refers to a question before on action research. Sir, if I may add, statistical. I think I lost that. Where's the? I think I lost the chat here. So if I may add, statistical tests depends on the research question of the actual action research. Action research is usually used when you make an invention in a classroom-based in classroom-based problems. Usually, if an intervention is effective or not, test on the differences in the performance is commonly used. Okay. There's a question again uh, on evaluation and of course certificates. I think I've answered that already. Certificates will be sent to CSP members, and if you want to have more details on becoming a member of CSP, you can know that through the link to the CSP website, and I think it has been also provided in the chat. Okay, so if there are no more questions, one last call for questions. Okay, if there are none, I'd like to check first if uh, Sir Francis is already around. Sir Francis, are you?
Opo.
Okay,
Yep.
good. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much again to everyone for those questions. At this point, I can confidently say that our next, we can proceed now to our next talk. And I can confidently say that the speaker does not need any introduction. And all I can say is that he is someone you can count on because he's proving that by giving this talk. No, folks, let's welcome once again Dr. Francis Cabarle to give the next talk.
Uh, okay. Thank you again for the introduction, Sir Job. Please just let me try to share my screen. Okay. Can't seem to find my. Sorry, this one. Hmm, let me just close my previous slides and okay. Attempt to share my slides again. Okay. Hmm, okay. Mhm. Sorry, I'm not sure why the slides are not showing. Maybe desktop. Maybe this one would do it. Can you see my slides now,
Yes,
Sergio?
your slides, sir.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Again, good morning. Good morning to the attendees. So the next talk uh, this morning is about best practices in publishing your research. Okay, um, so let's start. So uh, now that for at least for some of you, now that you have at least some specific problems in mind, specific topics, and you've done some experiments or reading, at least maybe not experiments per se, but at least reading, and you want to start writing your research. And the first one of the first things I would like to emphasize is that at least for some people, they start the writing the research towards the end of the process of doing research. And I think uh, the writing of your research should be done as early as the start of your research, because uh, as I'll mention in detail in the next several slides, it involves creating a story, but it should not be a story of how you started from the beginning until the end, because that would be usually boring or too detailed for your reader. But instead, at least you have the practice of writing first and then revising as you go through your writing process until you finish your paper or proposal for a funding agency. So to write your research, a research paper or even a research proposal is really just another story. But of course, there are some differences. The story or every section of your paper or proposal should tell a story, and of course, the story must make sense, orderly, or another way to say it is systematic and with no gaps. Gaps meaning the sections of your paper or proposal must support one another, and there must be a continuation from one section to another. That is, the section X leads to section X plus one, or section X plus one is based on section X, or at least a few other earlier sections. And of course, your story of your paper or proposal must engage the reader, or if you're writing a proposal, the funding agency. Uh, Otherwise, they would not even be interested in reading or funding your work. And of course, the research paper must be objective. Okay, it has to have some goals. It's not just any kind of story or a novel that we read. It has to have objectives or goals in mind, and I'll elaborate that in the next few slides. Okay, so the first thing, one of the several tips or suggestions in this slide and this talk, I think there will be about 7 or 8. The first one is you need to schedule writing appointments and keep those appointments. Okay, you want to use tools such as the tried and tested one, calendars, reminders, or software. I put software here because you don't necessarily need to use digital calendars or apps, calendar apps or reminder apps for this. The tried and tested wristwatch or a paper-based calendar with post-its or others are very can be very useful. Okay, And you need to do regular writing workouts, because of course the idea of writing workouts or regularly maintaining your writing appointments is to exercise your so-called writing muscles. Okay, and the more you write, of course, the better you become at it. And one suggestion, of course, is to select conditions most conducive to your writing. And for example, in the past few months, we have been uh, in quarantine or lockdown. So some of us may be more maybe more conducive in certain parts of your home, or maybe to go outside. In my case, sometimes when my 3-year-old nephew is around, I have to sometimes hide in the closet or something similar to get in the better condition for writing. Okay, or to wait for the children to go to sleep first and to relax before you start writing. So whatever those conditions are that make it conducive for you to write and to keep your writing appointments, please do them. Again, you don't have to depend on technology, but if you do use technology, make sure that you make technology work for you rather than stressing you out, in which case it's a feedback wherein you're not able to write because of your dependence on certain technology. Okay. So number two is create the detailed. It helps to create detailed outlines. Outlining is a good idea. Usually using bullets, numbered bullets, or it could just be circles or arrows to outline your or to create your outline, a skeleton of your paper or proposal. And of course, as I'll mention in the next few slides, it's useful and usually important to discuss with mentors or advisors and peers. No? So of course, mentors can also be peers. What we mean by peers is essentially those who are studying with you or preparing the proposal with you for example, for a conference or for a degree and so on. So uh, you want your literature review here at the top. So some of the four main ideas for this section of your paper, or at least for your narrative of your papers, you want to ask. I want to answer. Sorry, some of these questions. So, for example, why should readers or funding agencies read your work? So that answers why your research is important. What is the impact, uh, the significance of your work? And of course, an important part in the relation to the questions earlier this morning is what is known about your topic. So what is known and what is of course also not known. So these are referring to the gaps. Okay. Number three, one other important question the narrative of your research paper or proposal must answer is what are the hypotheses? What are the educated guesses based on theories, background, software tools, classes, or courses you have taken in the past and papers you have read? What are some of the hypotheses, the educated guesses? And of course, as mentioned at the beginning, what are the objectives of your research paper proposal? What do you aim to seek or to establish? Again, research aims to establish facts and new results. So without those things, then of course your research would not be a reasonable research work. Okay, and of course you may be able to you're likely to use these tools and methods such as theoretical concepts or methods, at least especially if your work is mainly theoretical. uh, if your work is mainly empirical or constructive, of course you will need to establish the tools that you will need, for example certain software, it could be neural network technologies, GPUs, and so on. And how are your tools related, or how will they be used to solve or to at least to approach or answer the hypothesis or the educated guesses you listed at the top over here. And of course, the subjects of your study, it could be people using some software or some social media platform, your subjects could be nodes in a network, okay, in a graph or in a network, uh, and other things, okay, other kinds of data or constructs. And of course, your narrative must talk about the results. The narrative, your research paper or research proposal, certainly must talk about these things, such as what are your main results. Okay, you must be able to convey this as I mentioned in the previous talk. Sorry, and what are the supporting results? Meaning, at least for theoretical results, these are the lemmas to your theorems. And for the more applied or empirical results, what are the some of the setup or the pre-processing that you must do in order to achieve your main results. Okay, and of course, lastly, the narrative of your research paper or proposal. Again, you summarize or recap your results, and as well as the significance, uh, the impact of your results, and what comes after. Now that you have established this in terms of a research paper, or now that you have, assuming you have established them in your research proposal, what are the implications or significance? Recapping or summarizing them at the end is a good idea to structure or construct your narrative. Okay, so the next suggestion for writing your papers or proposals is, of course, you want to write clearly, concisely, and objectively. But again, as mentioned in the first, in the start of this slide, these slides, it's a work writing, especially technical or scientific writing, is or professional writing is a work in progress. So you want to be meticulous and accurate, but at the same time, many of us suggest that you avoid the temptation of editing immediately. Uh, so you want to keep writing first your ideas, starting with an outline. As I mentioned earlier, you want to use bullets, no, to write the skeleton or outline of your paper or proposal. Sections first, and then the subsections, and then even the sections within your subsections, and so on, and what they're about. And the idea to avoid the temptation of editing immediately, rather than to write out your ideas about papers you read, your hypothesis, and so on, is you want to revise and edit drafts later because, as I said, these will come and these are important parts of your work. But uh, one suggestion is to avoid or to avoid the temptation of editing your work immediately, because otherwise you may not be able to proceed further if you are too meticulous or accurate at the start. Okay. Of course, the paper interest it can create a loop. No? Result interest. Of course, the right side here, result, can refer to the interest of your readers or funding agencies. So if people can see the interest that you put in your paper, then they will be interested in reading the results, which makes them more interested to keep reading your paper and so on. So it can be a loop that that we want to use and to capitalize. Okay, and of course you want to use illustrative materials and text uh, to objectively present key findings and not merely to be shown but never referenced. Okay, so one of course one pitfall or a common mistake, especially for the younger researchers, is to include especially what can call a single-use graph or a single-use text. Sorry, single-use image. And sometimes the younger researchers would even include graphs or images that are never referenced in the main text. So those things can be removed later on, but at the beginning, as I mentioned, you can don't be tempted to edit immediately. So put some figures or graphs or images that you think will support the narrative of your research paper proposal, and then just revise and edit them later. Okay, and writing your research paper or proposal is similar to computer programming. Writing feedbacks per draft. You write in and perform revising per draft. So you first complete the outline, uh, section, subsection, and so on. Fill in the outline with as much detail and text as you want, as you deem necessary. And once you complete it, then you read it from start to finish again, preferably with co-authors. If you have the luxury of having co-authors or advisors and peers. Uh, then afterwards, keep revising your paper as well, or your proposal as well, okay, with more details in the coming slides. So uh, as I mentioned earlier, writing the research paper proposal, you want to clarify ideas and not confuse your readers or your funding agencies, of course, which is one reason why you want to start writing early. Do not edit immediately. Complete the draft and then do the revising and feedback system so that you can be meticulous and accurate. So you want to provide a clear story that is it is comprehensive but avoiding peripheral information. Okay, what we mean by this is that for example, if you're tempted in your first draft, this is okay to write something like this: to show our results, we first introduce all system components and describe each component in detail, and so on, before going to the main results. Okay, and as mentioned in the previous lecture, um, research papers are usually much shorter than thesis reports. Okay, they're about 8 to 15 pages, single column. And in your first draft, writing something like this is okay, but during the subsequent revisions, you want to remove these things and instead to give enough details so that the readers or your funding agencies can start reading and understanding your first part of your result, if you have several results, okay? And to avoid peripheral information, uh, you want to move some of the details or prerequisites at a later section. So for example, if you're writing in section 4, about some ideas or parts of your system or framework or study, but these ideas or prerequisites will be used in section 10. It might be a better idea in your subsequent revisions to only mention a few ideas or concepts in the next few sections, okay? And then introduce the remaining ideas or concepts in sections more immediate or adjacent to the sections where you will introduce your next results. Okay, sorry. Uh, and then you want to distinguish your results from your data. So especially for graduate work, masters uh, and so on, and of course for senior undergraduate students, for some of us who are educators, um, it's usually easy to generate data, graphs, tables, and so on. But of course, at least for the computing sciences, an often misconception is when you produce numbers and charts and tables that those are your results. But of course, actually, those are not results. They're uh, in some sense, they are outputs of your experiment, but the main results of your research paper or proposal would be the algorithms, the methods, the application or software you develop to answer your hypothesis at the start. Okay, and of course, in writing your paper proposal, just to reiterate the FFP. Uh, One of them is falsification, includes wherein you include only the results uh, that support your hypothesis and excluding contradicting results. So if you have results that contradict your hypothesis or your ideas, you should also include that in your report, in your paper proposal. Okay, otherwise you can be guilty of falsification. So some other suggestions in order to write clearly, concisely, and objectively. you want to avoid unnecessary adjectives or adverbs. Again, these sections will be suggestions I'm talking about come after you have at least one complete draft. Okay, so do not be tempted to revise immediately, especially if you are a new researcher. You know? So you, for example, you if you your first draft, you if your first draft you say the larger file size is so and so, as better. Uh, it's better to simply say the file size is okay, and then you mention it in terms of bytes or megabytes, no megabits. And if you in your early draft you write the result is virtually so and so effective, you can simply say it is so. Okay, you straightforward language is easier to read, especially if you're writing for an audience, an international audience in an international conference or so on, or at least you expect some of your work to be read by people who are non-native English speakers, and even who are native English speakers. This a direct type of writing style is better for especially for technical papers. Okay, and when you use acronyms and synonyms, you have to use them effectively. What I mean by that is, for example, if you write in your paper proposal the mechanism, but later you use a synonym, the technique, uh, it's better to minimize the use of synonyms, at least to make clear of them at the start, and to avoid saying using another synonym to mean the same thing, to say the same thing you mentioned previously. No? So the mechanism, it's better to maintain using this word. And for example, uh, to not only save time in printing, if that is an option for your report or proposal, acronyms are one of the best things to use. So instead of saying computerized registration system over and over, you can say it once and then say that it is shortened as CRS, and then keep using CRS henceforth, okay, in the subsequent sections. Another common suggestion for writing your paper or proposal is to use a consistent voice. Some writers prefer to shift or to switch between passive and active. Uh, Personally, I prefer the active voice. So it's better to say we show that rather than saying the more passive version, the researchers show that. Okay. Uh, of course you can there is no single standard to follow, but I think the more the active voice is the more straightforward and easier to read in terms when writing papers or proposal, right? And when writing your when revising, sorry, your work, as much as possible, try to use a consistent tense, especially if you're writing about the work that you have finished. No? Of course, if you're writing a work that is still continuing, then you have to use the appropriate tense for that. So you can say we show that, or we showed that, past tense. Or of course, you can also some also write it had been shown that, but I personally prefer simple past. No? We showed that rather than the compound type of writing down here. Okay, so the next suggestion for writing your papers, number 4, is interest your reader in the introduction. So the introduction should be a compelling, already a summary of the rest of your paper. Okay, because as some of you may have read or heard, usually the introduction is written last in your paper, because first you have to write about your results or techniques or the papers you've read, whether you're preparing a paper or a proposal, and then write the introduction and abstract last. And the reason for that is, of course, as much as possible, you want to make the introduction as attractive as possible to your reader or your funding agency. And some ways to do that, to make your introduction as interesting as possible, is to give the key points and novelty of your work in this section. Okay, you want to you want to show how and why your research areas is important, useful and interesting, but has some gaps. It has some unsolved problems or questions that you or other researchers in the past may have identified in relation to the previous talk and during the Q&A section. Research gaps or open problems are abound, and so, answering some of these gaps or research problems in some way, addressing them is part of the narrative or the reason for being of your research paper or research proposal. So what you next want to do in your research, in the narrative of your paper, and in particular your introduction, no? Sa introduction pa lang, is you want to solve the gap established in previous research, or establish a new type of system, or even a new question, no? To extend the knowledge. And you also want to occupy that niche that you identified, the gap. There are gaps, no, plural, and one of them you want to give a solution to, at least to extend the coverage of that knowledge for that gap. Okay, so you will outline your objectives. You will list your research questions, again your educated guesses, hypotheses. Your introduction will state the main findings, the value or impact of your research, and of course, give the structure of your research paper in one form or another. Okay, what the reader or the funding agency can expect in the next sections of your paper proposal. So the next suggestion for writing your publishing your paper or proposal is, you want to include, of course, concepts, relationships, generalizations. Okay, but of course, you want to present these in a concise and convincing way. Uh, some suggestions to do this is, of course, to mention your study, no? Your research major findings, or at least if you're writing a proposal, what you expect to be some of your major findings. Of course, it is a research, so there is some uncertainty involved, but at least some of the results or findings you expect to have in your proposed research. If you're writing a proposal, you want to state the major findings and the importance of your work. And basically what this answers in your narrative is, what's the point of doing your research, of the reader or the funding agency reading your work. So this is one short way to state it. What's the point, you know, of your research paper or proposal? And to help you establish the point of your research paper proposal, of course, that the part of that is the literature review, as many of us know. Okay, the literature review can be considered as putting context in your work. Where does it belong? Is it in fundamental or basic research, or applied, or mixture of both? Okay, in computer networks, databases, and so on. You want to compare and contrast with other works, and some would call it as formalized panlalait. But of course, it when you write it this way, saying the disadvantages of other people's work is part of it. But of course, as we'll mention in a moment, you should also be able to identify the disadvantages of your own ideas in a moment. Okay, you want to state the limitations, weaknesses of other works, as well as your own, the assumptions of your study, because uh, it's a difficult thing to sell or to convince other people that your ideas or your proposal, your methods, techniques, application, and so on are without fault. That is a very difficult thing to convince people to believe in. Okay, so uh, in order to better convince the readers or the funding agency, you have to be able to state these things. Okay, and of course, to close your paper or proposal, to close your narrative, as I mentioned again, you want to summarize answers to your research questions or gaps that you identified, and again summarize the importance of your work to include some possible applications, recommendations or implications. Okay, the significance or impact of your work. Now, uh, also included in providing concepts, relationships, and generalizations. Some research can include theoretical framework or TF. Okay, the TF demonstrates understanding of the theories, concepts relevant to your research. Okay, that is, you have some theories, some paper you read, and the theoretical framework or TF helps you explain to the reader or to the funding agency uh, how you understand or how you plan to use these theories, concepts, papers you've read in order to solve your hypothesis or to achieve your objectives. Okay, so the TF is used to explain how to examine your data as well, and it links your methodology. That is the logical or time-based sequence of steps you will use to finish your research, your hypothesis, your educated guesses, and the literature or work you've read. Okay, so usually theoretical framework is a visual is presented in a visual way, but you can also simply write it in text or prose form, whichever is more appropriate for your style or funding agency or target audience. So the methodology, as I mentioned, is the orderly sequence of methods from literature to examine your data, or at least your the constructs of your focus, the focus of your research, to answer your hypothesis or educated guesses that you established at the beginning of your narrative, okay, of your story. So uh, the sequence could be, as I mentioned, time-based, so spread out over weeks, months, or years, depending on your research. Or it could be a logical sequence. That is, step 2 is required by step 3 and step 4. But for example, step 4 can be done in parallel with step 3, something like that. Okay, so I think we're almost done in this lecture. So number 6 suggestion is when it is time to submit. Okay, so that is you've checked the previous parts. You first created an outline, a skeleton using bullets or numbers, and then you filled in the sections with more details and figures to be able to produce a complete draft. And then you revised with the help of your mentors, peers, advisors, students, and so on. Now it's time to submit, and these are some of the things to do or not to do next. Okay. These are some of the tools, resources, techniques to better help you with the iterative revision collaboration process. Okay. So the iterative process of submitting a paper, and usually this applies to submitting a proposal as well. For example, I've in the past several years or so been I've been not only submitting papers but reviewing papers as well for conferences and journals, as well as for example for the DOST projects to be funded by the DOST. The first step is usually, of course, to submit the paper, research paper proposal, and then you wait for some time to receive the comments, and then you will revise your paper proposal and then resubmit. So, and for certain funding agencies or certain journal publications, this the submit, revise, and resubmit process takes at least 2 times. No? That is, you get 2 sets of reviews, and you need to revise at least 2 times. And sometimes, depending on your work and the reviewers or the editors, could be more. No? But at least this is done. This is done at least once. And of course, typesetting spell checking, especially nowadays with hardware software becoming cheaper or more ubiquitous. You It's always almost always a good idea to check the format of or the required format of your funding agency. It could be in PDF or Microsoft Word format. Okay, spell checkers are again usually easy to acquire these days, so it helps to use software to do spell checking for sharing with your collaborators, students, or peers, the mentors. Yeah, Dropbox, Google Docs, and so on. Uh, the last several years for people who have been such as myself and our group in our lab have been who use LaTeX typesetting system quite a lot. Overleaf it makes it easier for us to collaborate here and abroad. It's a web-based LaTeX system, okay, and it also includes free access as well as paid access for people. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, plagiarism checkers are also quite easy to find these days. Some of them are I list here: bibme.org, and checktext.org, and so on. Where some of these are, I think the ones I listed here are free plagiarism checkers. They check the work you submit with respect to online open online resources in the internet, no? Wikipedia, forums, and other open and online databases. Okay, but for example, for some of us behind institutional subscriptions, we can have Scopus, uh, I think Turnitin, and other paid plagiarism checkers if you have that in your university or institution. Okay, so of course, what you want to do as well is to check that you did your proper citations, because when submitting to conferences, especially to journals, and sometimes for funding agencies, one criterion for evaluating your paper proposal is if you have enough relevant citations in the subject area or in your research area. So again, you want to use citation tools and citation search tools. So for example, EasyBib uh, is a way to organize your citations, but Google Scholar, Mendeley, and WorldCat are tools to help you search for citations. That is, if you have a paper in mind, Google Scholar, Mendeley, or Scopus at least will show you which papers cited, no? That papers. So therefore, you have a better idea, especially of the updated references, because when you're writing, especially in computing related field, where especially the technology or the applications are developed in a very rapid or fast pace, uh, something a citation where your latest citation could be 5 years ago, that is unlikely to be the latest citation, because again, if you recall, the definition of research is to establish new facts. And if the last reference in your paper proposal is from 5 years ago, then it is of a high probability that you are missing some more recent papers related to that last paper or latest paper you're citing. Okay, and another thing to watch out for is the predatory journals. Right? This is not only for people who are submitting to journals, but also to reading papers. From journals listed in this included in this list. So the Beals list is a well-known list of predatory journals. By predatory journals, we mean those journals that are not really, that at least seem to be academic in nature, but they're actually for profit only, and not really concerned with academic integrity or for research purposes. Okay, they're So I think this one may also include not only journals but predatory conferences, conferences that are in some sense scams. Okay, so it's easy to check that, especially if you're submitting to a conference or journal, or if you're reading a paper from some of the conferences or journals listed in this Beals list. Okay, so I think that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening again. And these are some of the sources that I used to prepare this presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, again, thank you very much, Dr. Lavarle, for those important insights. So we will now be opening once again the floor for questions. Okay, thank you very much for that, sir, giving us details on how to really come up with your paper, even giving us practical insights. No,
Mhm.
so questions, please. Uh, there is one, and I read. I am utilizing Sci-Hub. This is from Billy Javier. I'm utilizing Sci-Hub as a gateway to access materials for free. Would I not violate IP matters? What is or are standard similarity indices for IS related developmental studies or social computing researches? Do we not consider Beal Smith since other scientists suggest it's one sided?
Okay. I will try to at least give some answers for some of these questions from, of course, my experience or background. But if other panel members have want to answer, chime in, please do. Um, the first one is about Sci-Hub, and I am aware of Sci-Hub as a gateway to access materials for free. That is, materials behind paywalls in Springer, Science Direct, Taylor and Francis, Wiley, and so on. So the question is, would I not violate IP matters? And uh, my general answer to this is, at least for those with behind paywalls, uh, Sci-Hub is indeed violating the IP matters, uh, especially if your in the paper that you're downloading is behind the paywall, is not included in your subscription. So there are a few ways to go about this, of course, without violating anything. And one would be to use your university subscription uh, to access the paper. If that is not a possibility, there are libraries online, websites online, including UP Diliman Library, where you can inquire from the librarian to give you an access to the paper, especially if you're not planning to sell or to earn anything from the paper. No, it will be for personal and research use. Another would be to use Google Scholar, because Google Scholar, for certain papers, if you search a paper in Google Scholar has a reasonable web crawler where for some papers it will give you versions of the paper, preprints of the paper, essentially the early or even final drafts of the paper that you're looking for, minus the copyrighted and the journal information. Okay, so you can still read the paper. Another way to do this is, of course, to ask your friends in the university to help you out. And an easy way to do this also is to directly write to the author. Okay, often the authors are very willing to give you a copy of their paper, because it means the paper will be read and possibly used or cited. And the next question is, what are our standard similarity indices for IS, related developmental studies or social computing researches? Um, I think you're referring to ISI in this case. So, if I'm not mistaken, ISI is for the mathematical, technical, mathematics, natural sciences, and the humanities or social sciences. uh, have their own index, I think. Okay, but the other panel members may be able to give a better answer. And the last question of the uh, in that group is, do we not also, sorry, do we not, I think nawala, do we not also consider Bill's list, since other scientists suggest it's one-sided? Uh, that one is up to you. I think there will, in any topic, I think there will always be pro and anti uh, a topic. And what I'm simply saying here is to consider or to check for, the bills list. No? Of course, it's not not it can be some entries in bills list could be mistaken, in which case you can, I think, send a feedback to have them removed. For example, if they're mistakenly included in a predatory conference or journal. Okay, I
Okay,
think. Mhm.
okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you for that.
Mhm.
Here's another question from Mark Hill Gangan.
Mhm.
What is the difference between theoretical framework and conceptual framework? How and when do we use TF or CF in research?
Maybe Sir Jeff or
Or
uh,
any one of the panelists could perhaps help out
sorry.
answer that question, because there are some research domains where such would be more used or more experienced in using that, and can further differentiate that. Any one of the panelists may perhaps help. Theoretical framework and conceptual framework. Hmm. Okay,
I
well,
think.
okay, yeah, please.
Just to note, Sir Jeff, I think after the question of Mark Hill Gangan, uh, Meljun Cortes has three uh, subsequent questions about theoretical framework, and then so maybe some the panel member who can answer may be able to cover some of the subsequent questions. Thank you.
Yep, yep, yep. Well, while I wait for others. From what I know, I believe the conceptual framework provides the main thrust or direction for the research, whereas theoretical framework provides somewhat, if normally there's a graphical representation wherein you relate the entities involved in the study, and you provide a way to visualize and explain how these entities involved in the study are related. That's mainly what I see in the theoretical framework, whereas the conceptual framework will be the main thrust or the theory behind what you're doing, the study that you're making. Uh, Perhaps other insights can be shared on that by other panelists. But in the meantime, of course, as Sir Mark Hill, other answers are coming in sometimes even way after the question is asked. So we'll just wait for further answers on that, and we can proceed with the rest of the questions. So, what are the tips and strategies in order to have a fast and reliable and suited and which conform to the categories uh, or categories or qualifications if applying uh, for a grant, applying for a grant, study grant in UP, DLSU, or Ateneo for scholarships. Could you give some advice if you don't mind? I'm not sure if this is really on applying for study grants
Mhm.
in the schools
Uh,
mentioned.
Maybe Sir Jeff, I can give
Okay,
some answers. Thank you.
that is,
Uh, yeah, I think if you're referring to research or research grants. So I can have I can give some tips or advice. I have had a few in the past several years for UP funded research grants, and I think one tip to be able to quickly satisfy them is, of course, to follow some of the tips mentioned, not just in these slides that I discussed this morning, but the general sections, you know, introduction, related work, significance, scope limitation, those general portions. If you can have your research following those, and then from one grant to another, it should be relatively easy for you to modify uh, the, the 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 narrative. Okay, again, the narrative is the most important one, because some grants may require you to combine related work with significance, importance, scope limitations. Some grants require you to specifically separate them into sections. So those kinds of grants, in my experience, if you have a good grasp of the narrative of your research, it should not be a problem. And at least from my perspective, the typesetting is also can be your boon or bane. You know, in that in my specific case, I usually have a LaTeX copy of my proposal uh, that I roughly follow the format, no? The sectioning and so on, uh, and so that if the requirement, for example, is a PDF, is a PDF file, that is quite trivial for me to produce in LaTeX. But if the requirement, for example, for some grants is a Microsoft Word format, that one involves some extra effort from my part, but it's usually still easier. I convert it to one format and then that format to Microsoft Word. And also something to note, and maybe will be discussed by future speakers in this workshop series, is citation format, as I mentioned. So there are tools, as I mentioned in my previous slides, you know, BibMe and so on. But LaTeX and Overleaf in particular, for example, make it easier as well to organize. Mendeley is included, no, Google Scholar, to organize your citations and to export them into a specific format that is most approximate, or approximates best the required format of your funding agency. Okay, so those are some of the things. You create a database of your references and sources. You write it in a format, or at least in a system that you can easily export to other formats, no? For the for the funding agency, and of course to have a clear idea of the narrative, so that if one funding agency requires a splitting of sections or a combination of sections, you can easily do that when preparing your proposal or paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, sir. Um, okay, next question. What is the universal, what are the universal standards of theoretical framework on research papers and thesis in terms of adopting the theory?
I think the next question by the same attendee is related to theoretical framework. Maybe of the of our panel members uh, with uh, with more experience on this type can answer.
Perhaps some are have more experience on that. Well, just to give a backgrounder, no? So this is uh, a workshop and seminar sponsored by CSP. Many of the panelists are practically involved in computer science research and IT research. And in many of these cases, the outputs or the research outputs and in making the papers in those domains, no, do not use much of these concepts, no, the conceptual framework and theoretical framework. Um, which is why it's not we are not very much adept to these unless you have unless some of the panelists have used them already.
Uh, Hi, Sir Joff. Maybe I
Yes,
can answer.
Sir Brian. Thank you, Dr. Samson. Please answer.
Hi, I'm Brian Samfrom from DLSU. So my background is on human-computer interaction, which is a subset of a subfield in computer science. So we do use some theoretical framework. So to answer the question, it really depends on the kind of solution that you want to propose in your research. So for example, um, when I did my PhD work, I only discussed one theory in my dissertation, which is self-determination theory, because my research question is how can I encourage drivers to follow unselfish routes through a technology solution, for example, a navigation application. So in that case, I chose as my proposed solution to apply the theory of self-determination theory, which is a behavior change theory, um, in my dissertation. So that's what I discussed. So it's really up to the researcher to identify the appropriate theories that they think can help address the research problem that they want to solve.
Mhm. Oh, well, actually, thank you very much for that, Dr. Samson. Dr. Samson is actually involved in studies where human behavior is involved. Thus, uh, existing theories on human behavior can be made of use in such studies. No, um, well, in general, theoretical framework is based on existing theories, whereas your conceptual framework can be something that you can develop from the past and you can pursue as the basis of your study. Thank you very much. There are no more open questions here. I'd like
Okay.
to point out that if you look at the chat, Dr. Caro and even I myself have placed some links there. One link is on the evaluation. You can click that link and be able to have access to the evaluation form. And some details on CSP and other questions are also in the chat. Dr. Sir Tabi is able to answer, is sharing his insights here also. Um, just to share, theoretical framework relies on theories, yeah, as I said, existing theories established while, okay, we lost that chat. Existing theories on how you conduct your study and how the variables are related to each other in your study. Conceptual framework is the blueprint of the entire flow of your study. So theoretical framework represents the explanation reflected on your conceptual framework. Thank you very much for that, for those insights, Sir Tabi. Agree on your insights, Sir Tabi, as mentioned by Ms. Annalisa Ramos. Conceptual framework is a relationship of the variables towards achieving the goal of the study. A technical paper represents the flow of your study. Okay, so other things. Okay, okay. Here's an insight from D. Kang. What are the different difficulties that the researcher encounters in publishing their research? And are there any better tips on strategies on way of moving out of such difficulties? So, what are the basic difficulties that
Mhm.
researchers encounter in publishing their research? So, from the development of the research and towards publishing that research, what are some major difficulties that are
Mhm.
encountered, and how do you struggle your way out of such difficulties? What strategies do researchers use and scientists use to move out of these or to break through these
Mhm.
difficulties? Sir Francis and any other
Uh,
panelists may be able to answer.
okay. Since I have quite a number of experiences with publishing your research, conferences, journals, book chapters, and so on, I will give some answers to these questions. Thank you. These are good and valid questions, of course, for any researcher, young or not so young. My first answer would be, of course, to promote some of the talks in this workshop, with which in day I'm looking at day two, and the top topics in day two are about where to submit and what to aim for in conferences and journals. And the other talk is where to submit your proposal if you want your proposal uh, to be funded. But more specifically, in submitting to conferences or journals, this is a common concern of researchers, no? Whether you're working for a degree or you're already a faculty or in the industry. You have written a research paper, but you don't know which conference or journal to submit it to. One quick way to do that, of course, is to check the about page of the journal. Usually, a journal will list there the areas the journal specifically caters to. Again, there are conferences or journals which are broader broader in terms of the scope, in which case your work is more likely to be accepted in those broad broad area conferences or journals. But again, the level of feedback you may get may not be as deep or as compelling if you submit it to a conference or journal specifically in that area. Now, if your area is machine learning or computer security, you can submit in generic computer science IT conferences, but if you really want to get even better expert feedback or opinion, then you want to submit to a computer security, your paper about computer security to a computer security conference or journal, and so on and so forth. And of course, uh, at least for conferences, some of my colleagues, some of their concerns is acceptance ratio. No? So, for example, there are big conferences. What you mean by big depends on the sub area of computer science, for example. But for some conferences, there are hundreds to thousands of submissions. So therefore, they can only accommodate a small fraction of that, and therefore the acceptance ratio is low. Whereas the other conferences or journals receive only a few dozen submissions per year or per month, and therefore uh, they have a larger acceptance ratio. Okay, so those are some of the suggestions I can give for new or even established researchers, as well as in relation to the tools that I mentioned earlier, using a tool that you're most comfortable with. In my case, it's a LaTeX typesetting system, which allows me to easily convert my paper proposal to various formats. Some of them are closest to the required format of the conference or journal or funding agency. Yun lang po. Maybe others can add to the can send their answers to the question. Thank you.
Mhm. I thank you for those answers, Sir Francis. And I think what he shared would be not just to give one answer, but actually it provides a spectrum. You can actually, I second that. You have before you a spectrum. If you want to get to a conference or a journal that's very general, it may be easier, but you cannot benefit as much. But sometimes when the conference you're attending is more specific to a particular area, and perhaps it may include a more stringent process. The feedback you'll be getting, because it's more specific to a domain, would be much higher, much better. Then you can opt for that. But if you opt for the easy one, you can try that. No, but still there are pros and cons. And also specifically, if you want to get to a, a higher quality, uh, related very much related to that, if you aim for higher quality, then it will be much more difficult, comparing with a conference or journal that has a lower impact factor, no? So there are various factors to consider when it comes to publishing, and I'd like to note some insights here that are even mentioned by some of our attendees. No. Um, Researchers encounter difficulties in terms of looking reliable publication, in terms of the looking for reliable publications and conference, and sometimes they are also ambivalent with regards to the scope of their work. Okay, and if you attend next week, no, these will be some topics, some of the topics that will be mentioned. Know where to submit, what conferences and journals do you aim for, specifically in the aim of in the realm of computing sciences and IT. There is one attendee who's raising her hand. Uh, I'd like to get um, uh, Radams Roque. Radams Roque. I'll allow you to talk if you have this question. I'll allow you to talk. Talking permitted as to mute. Or if sometimes this happens even in our meetings, the raised hand is pressed. So it's okay. It's okay. You can just again indicate in the Q&A if you have questions. Okay. Thank you very much for your insights and your answers to all these questions. Again, thank you very much, Sir Francis, for those. So definitely it has been enriching two talks for us this morning. And at this point, we would like to express our appreciation to Dr. Cabarle by sharing the certificate. Of course, this will be sent to you eventually, but may read the citations here from the Computing Society of the Philippines in cooperation with the Department of Computer Science, University of the Philippines, Diliman, presents the certificate of appreciation to Dr. Francis George Cabarle for sharing his invaluable knowledge and insights in the field of research as guest speaker during the CSP online seminar workshop on research, given this, of course, today is 7th day of November. Okay, 2020. Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you po.
Okay,
Salamat po.
thank you very much again, Sir Francis. I will be
Thank you po.
sending you an updated version of that certificate later on. I'm happy to announce, however, that we have 118 attendance this morning. And this afternoon, we'll be having a workshop. So to the workshop participants, a link has been sent to you by email. So please, the workshop participants this afternoon, please look at your emails because there are some special instructions there. Please be in the Zoom meeting that is sent to you by 1 p.m. To the mentors, I hope we can meet by around 12:45. In that link also, a link has been sent to you. So I hope we can meet a little earlier by 12:45. We are quite early. No, we are also going to be dismissed early because of that. Again, thank you, Dr. Cabarle. Thank you to all participants. Thank you, CSP, for this event. See you all next week, same time, same link. And we will be hearing next week from Dr. Dave Marshall and from Dr. Merlin Suarez as they give their talks, which I'm sure will be helpful for all of us as we continue to grow in research. That actually ends our day one morning session. Again, from CSP, thank you all for attending, and may we all have a blessed weekend. Thank you very much.